All right, hello everyone. Welcome to Soapbox Theology. This is Pastor Gabe again. We're continuing our look at 1 Timothy, and we're in chapter 5, and we're in the next section of chapter 5. The first section had to do about looking after widows and taking care of your family. This is actually kind of gets into a little bit specifics about what it looks like of helping those that are in need. Still using the example of widows, but I kind of wanted to apply this to the area of social justice, right? The idea of the church is supposed to be taking care of the poor, helping all of those in need, and what does that look like? And today is actually a really important reminder that there is criteria for such things. So, if we want to put it this way, don't believe all widows. So let's read the text here. Starting in 1 Timothy 5:9, so we're going to be looking at 9 through 16. Let a widow be enrolled if she is not less than 60 years of age, having been the wife of one husband, and having a reputation for good works, if she has brought up children, has shown hospitality, has washed the feet of the saints, has cared for the afflicted, and has devoted herself to every good work. But refuse to enroll younger widows, when their passions draw them away from Christ, they desire to marry, and so incur condemnation for having abandoned their former faith. Besides that, they learn to be idlers, going about from house to house, and not only idlers, but also gossips and busybodies, saying what they should not. So I would have younger widows marry, bear children, manage their households, and give the adversary no occasion for slander, for some have already strayed after Satan. If any believing woman has relatives who are widows, let them care for them. Let the church not be burdened, so that it may care for those who are truly widows. So again, there's this idea of widows. We talked about it a little bit last time. Widows would have been a large part of society, in that the ordering of the family was really important. The men, it certainly was a patriarchal society in the true sense of the word, not in the byword that it's become today, where it just means we don't like men and men shouldn't be in charge and blah, blah, blah. Historically, men have always led. God has set up the world that way, in that men are leaders. Men rise to the front, women raise the children, and so men have to go out and take care and protect and provide, where women are naturally taking care of that role. But because the inheritance would pass down through the man, through the firstborn, it would often leave, being that when all of the family members died, the men died, there might very well be a woman left behind. And we talked about that last time. And so today, it's very interesting, because I think at first blush we might say, well, why does there need to be qualifications for a widow? Doesn't the church just help everyone the same? Shouldn't we just be showing compassion and be about grace? But this is actually really important. The Bible doesn't just say, believe all widows, right? Doesn't just say, serve everybody in the world who says they need help. It actually sets up criteria to help. Why? We get this in the last verse 16. Let the church not be burdened. The church would be really, really burdened if it bore the responsibility of taking care of every single downtrodden and poor person in the world. The church could not possibly handle that weight. Now, the church tries to help where it can, but it could not possibly bear that weight. And as we looked at in the end of the last section, it tells us, if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So again, this is supposed to be falling first upon the immediate family. You are supposed to take care of your parents when they get old. If your if your father has died and your mom is a widow, and this would be the same thing in today. If a woman has died and you just have an old father and he's a widow, same thing. You would be care for them. But especially in this kind of society, because of the roles that men and women played, it would be a much more immediate issue for the woman to be taken care of. But Paul gives a lot of criteria. You need to really make sure that this is a woman who truly needs help. There needs to be an evaluation that takes place. So let's look at a couple other verses just to bring this to bear. Remember the occasion in Acts 6. This was actually a big issue in the church. I'll read Acts 6, just the first couple of verses. Now in those days when the disciples were increasing in number, a complaint by the Hellenists those would be the Greeks, rose against the Hebrews because the widows were being neglected in the daily distribution. So immediately they understood we got to help those that are in need, those that are struggling, and obviously that would fall to widows and orphans. We'll get to that in a second. But so this was an obvious ministry that needed to happen, and the church was more than ready to help out. And this is where the first deacons are established. Let me read a verse from James. We looked at this before, but this is talking about what true religion is. We talked about this before in the book of James. James 1:27. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. So that one of the most obvious things you can do for religious devotion, devotion to God, showing piety, trying to minister on behalf of God, trying to show care, is to visit orphans and widows. Those are the two people in this society specifically that would have needed the most help. Again, fatherless, if you have no mother, if you have no parents, you're in the same situation as a widow, but much worse, because kids can't look after themselves. This is often when kids would fall into thievery, or worse, a woman might end up in prostitution, a girl, unfortunately, later on. Or same thing for a woman if she's young enough. So this idea that those are the most vulnerable society, the church is certainly supposed to look after them, and the church shouldn't. It is the church's responsibility to remember these things. We don't get to just kind of do our thing and ignore the cries of the world and the suffering, especially within the Christian community. Though this is talking about in your own community. Okay. Again, you help outside the community. That's awesome, but remember to especially reflect on those that are in your community. In that first instance with the widows, they were focusing on the believers within the church. Within the church, being in the church doesn't magically make you have it all together and totally taken care of. So Psalm 82:3. Here's one: defend the weak and the fatherless, uphold the cause of the poor and the repressed. And of the oppressed. So yes, of course, justice, and we need to be caring for those that are struggling is a biblical truth. Absolutely. Here's another one in Exodus 22:22. This is beginning when after the Ten Commandments have been given on Mount Sinai. Then there's the next few chapters are commentary. Here, this section says you must not mistreat any widow or fatherless child. Right? There's always going to be. Unfortunately, because we're sinful, those who are the most vulnerable are the easiest to take advantage of. And we see this today, frankly, with when a lot of people are locked into their Christian television and TBN, and they're saying, sow a seed, give us your money, give us your money, give us your money. And while these people that are so struggling are giving, thinking that they're actually going to gain blessing from the Lord, they don't. And the people on TV are benefiting and becoming rich, and those people will be judged. That's an awful thing. And so we aren't supposed to take advantage of people who are in those sort of dire straits. And so the idea is consistently throughout the Old Testament is don't pervert justice. Here's one: Deuteronomy 24:17. You shall not pervert justice due to the sojourner or to the fatherless, or to take a widow's garment in pledge. Okay, again, the most vulnerable. You're not supposed to see what you can get away with. You're not supposed to be operating in that sort of mindset. Okay, so all that to say, there is a precedent. We do need to care for people. We do need to be watching out for those people. But it doesn't mean just because someone comes up to you and says, I am this person, I'm a widow, I'm an orphan, I need help, that we're supposed to just say, okay, I'm a Christian, here you go, here's all my money. In other words, there's a point to be shrewd. There's a point to evaluate, and that is exactly what this section is about. Paul says, let not a widow be enrolled if she's less than 60 years of age. If she's still kind of young and she can still take care of herself and still might have family, don't immediately jump to give the resources. Why? Because the church is finite. The church doesn't have endless resources. Make sure she's really in need before you do this. And this might sound harsh, but this is actually important for us to understand. The church just doesn't have bottomless pockets. The church needs to evaluate and make sure that the person asking for help really needs the help. It's okay to make an inquiry. We don't have to believe all widows, okay? It's okay to make an inquiry. Our church has a ministry where we give out food to people, to the poor, to people that are struggling, and we have forms that you fill out, like, who are you? What are you doing? How many times have you been here? Have you maybe been here too often? Is it maybe time for you to get a job? Like, in other words, this isn't about enabling people who don't need the help. This is helping people who really, really do need help. And what's the best way to help people is to get them out of that situation. So it goes on and it starts to give criteria and having a good reputation. So in other words, and not only do you just do it because she needs it, this says she has to have a reputation of actually being a faithful Christian, right? She shows good works, verse 10. She's brought up children, has shown hospitality. You know, if she's denied having, if she hasn't had children, if she's had no interest in bringing up children, then there's something going on in her heart where she doesn't want to fulfill what it is God has called her to do. God has primarily called a lot of women to have kids. I know this might be getting into a different subject here, but just looking at the form and the function of our bodies, God has called women to bear children. Not every woman has that charge, but there is something when a young couple says that they just aren't interested in that. There is some sense where they're not fulfilling the call of God, which is to be fruitful and multiply. You know, God desires godly offspring from his people. And if we refuse that, we're not quite understanding the call of marriage. We're not quite understanding what it is to truly fulfill our role, to populate the earth and to bring about make disciples. One of the primary ways that we do that is through children. So this is saying if you're a widow but you've never brought up children, that's actually a problem. Interesting. That might be harder for us to understand, but it is some criteria that Paul's giving. Has shown hospitality. She has to be hospitable. She has to be someone, she's not stingy, right? She opens her house. Washed the feet of the saints, has cared for the afflicted, has devoted herself to every good work. And I don't think it's saying that she has to have accomplished every single thing on the list. But the idea is that she's displaying a life of piety and displaying a life that wants to serve the church. And therefore, in other words, if this woman is be faithful, then of course we're going to turn around and help her. But if she is not being faithful, this is saying, don't just readily throw out the aid. Focus on people that are actually maturing in Christ, that are actually fulfilling their roles. And this is so counter to culture today. Culture today says if anyone claims anything, you just help them. You help whoever anybody says for whatever reason, no questions asked. And they say it's kind of, you know, hateful and all this other kind of stuff for not simply just bending over backwards to fix all injustice problems. But this is, Paul's very much saying there needs to be a criteria because we couldn't possibly handle the load of everyone. And so we need to evaluate these things when you have a ministry. This is a good rule for when you're starting a ministry. How do we help people? How do we evaluate these things? How do we reciprocate? How do we continue to do it in the future? What do we do with repeat visitors? What do we do with people that seem to just be kind of just taking advantage? Okay, this is very much saying don't let people take advantage. It's okay to be wise. It's okay to be shrewd. Here's what it says, 11. But refuse to enroll any younger widows, for when their passions draw them away from Christ, they desire to marry. So there's this idea where when they're a widow, there's in a sense assigning themselves to their widowhood, if you want to say it, to being single and to serve. That's why it has those criteria. It's like if they're going to really become a widow and the church is really going to take up their cause and support them, then they need to focus on the ministry to other people. But if saying this is saying, but if they're still really young, if they're still really young, there's a possibility they're going to get married. They're going to still desire companionship. They're still going to desire to get married, raise up a family, and so when they're young, say you have other options available to you. Whereas this, older woman over here doesn't have the same options that you have. Go get married, raise a family, find someone to take care of you. And so again, that might sound harsh to us, but the Word of God isn't pulling any punches here. Because they're making a time when their passions will drive them away. That's just part of youth. That's part of growing. That's part of being human and desire to marry. It's not saying that desiring to marry is a problem. It's saying if you're expecting the church to take care of you and the church has invested in you and they're now relying on you to perform a certain ministry for the church, to again, like it had mentioned before, then don't turn around and just get married out from under them when they've been supporting you up to this point. It's not saying marriage is a bad thing. Marriage is a great thing. It's just saying if you're of that age, then pursue that avenue. Don't pursue help as a widow, because you still have plenty of time to do that. Verse 12, and so incur condemnation for having abandoned their former faith. So again, this is a faith issue here. When you're coming as in the church, you're a faithful Christian. You've decided to serve the church in this certain way. Don't abandon that by going the natural way of desiring to get married. It's just saying it's not a problem to get married. Just go and do that. And don't do it later after you've already decided one path. And again, we have to understand this is different culture from ours, but it does speak to a criteria. Besides that, they learn to be idlers, going about from house to house, and not only idlers, but also gossips, busybodies, saying whatever they should not. So this is, again, other examples of abandoning the faith. They're just lazy. They just want people to take care of them. They're just being gossip. They're just nosy. They're involved in everyone's business. They aren't being faithful. Don't invest in those kind of people. Don't open the coffers of the church up to that. Be wise, be shrewd, learn to evaluate, establish a process so that you're not taken advantage of. It's okay for the church to do that. That's what he's saying. And it's okay. And sometimes we need to hear this. It's not just that we run around and we try to clean everyone's nose. Like, we help where we can, but we need to have systems in place. This is saying it's okay to have a system, right? It's okay to have and establish a program. It's okay to have paperwork. It's okay to evaluate these things. It doesn't mean you're a bad person if you think maybe that person's going to take advantage of me. I see that guy out here all the time. He's always asking for change, and then I always see him down the street, on his phone, doing his thing. Like, does he really need the help? It's okay to ask those questions. That's what this is saying. So, let's see. Verse 14, so I would have younger widows marry, bear children, manage their households. Again, he's coming back to this primary purpose. Men and women have roles. We looked at this before. Men and women has roles. God calls us as roles. The church doesn't have any problem saying that. The Bible created men and women as complementary, right? Our bodies are shaped a certain way. Men provide the seed. Women provide the egg, raise the child, right? We talked about this before. We have roles, and we're not embarrassed to say that God created us with roles, and it benefits the society and the community, okay? Okay, so manage their households. This is what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to be faithful if they aren't. And then for 15, for some have already strayed after Satan. Again, so he's using an example here. He's not just saying this. He's saying people have strayed from the faith because the church takes up their cause, takes care of them, and they just fall into idleness. They just fall into being gossips. They're young and they get married. They don't appreciate the ministry, and so this ministry shouldn't be focused in that way. We're not helping in that sense. So they stray from the faith. Verse 16. Any believing woman who has relatives who are not widows, let them care for them. If she has relatives, they need to be caring for them. This is going back to the last section that we talked about before, right? If anyone does not provide for his relatives, this is verse 8, and especially members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. God takes this very seriously. We have to take care for our families first. We're not supposed to just become a burden on the church because the church has resources. We're not supposed to just assume that the church will take on the responsibility of all of the poor and all of the poverty. It's not our jobs to write that. We couldn't possibly do that. But we do see it as an important role, and we certainly take up that cause. But we're not looking to get walked over. We're not looking to get taken advantage of. It's okay to evaluate. It's okay to establish systems. That's what this section is saying. Churches need to go to this, and when they're having those little pricks of conscience, like, am I not being a good Christian by not just giving everyone all my money all the time and not asking questions? Like, no, this is saying we very much should do that. So let her relatives care for him. Let the church, finally 16, let the church not be burdened, so that it may care for those who are truly widows. So insert whatever ministry you're trying to help. Truly, right, poor, truly in need, actual victims. What does that mean? You need to find out who the victims are. You need to evaluate these things. You need to figure out what's true. Like, sorry, we don't just believe all women. We don't just believe all widows. We don't just believe all men. We don't just believe all stories. We evaluate because we actually want to help. And Paul is giving the criteria here to the church, giving it to Timothy. And so yeah, let's figure out a way to help people, but let's figure out a way that we're actually helping people and not being taken advantage of. And it's not just so that you're not cheated. I don't think that's his point. The point is that you're actually helping. Sometimes we will be cheated, and there's nothing we can do about that. But if we put systems in place, the point is we will actually be helping those who truly need it. And the church certainly is called to do this ministry. But it's okay to evaluate. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to try to do it in a way that actually helps people. So that's all for today. Evaluate your system. Figure out what true justice is, not just justice that people are screaming for. So thanks. We'll keep going next time. Bye.